first-year findings of the Certified Peer Specialist Career Outcomes Study. It's the session of the National Association of Peer Supporters Conference. All right, wonderful. Thank you and welcome back, Morgan. My name is Emily Ferris and my pronouns are she and her. For those of you who might be listening to this session, I am a woman in her mid-30s with shoulder-length brown hair and I wear glasses. We have enabled closed captions during this event. Please click the closed captions box here in your Zoom toolbar to find the option to enable captions individually. We request that during this presentation, attendees utilize the chat box to network, comment on the session, and interact with each other. But please utilize the Q&A box feature to ask questions. We want to make sure that we have the ability to see all of the questions asked, so we request that you use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. We also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, without whom this conference would not be possible. A huge thank you in particular to our full conference sponsor, Marigold Health. Please make sure to visit the virtual exhibit hall, in which you can find all information on all of our sponsors, and it is on the conference page under the sponsors tab. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our featured presenter for this section. It's Morgan Pelot with Live and Learn Inc. So with that, I will stop my share and Morgan, allow you to share. I do have to make you a co-host again.
Thank you, and give me one moment to bring up my PowerPoint. My work computer has been having issues and decides to randomly shut down. So I've switched to my personal computer. So give me one moment to bring up the PowerPoint slide. But while I do that, I can at least introduce myself. My name is Morgan Pelot, and I work for a company called Live and Learn. I am the research program manager for Live and Learn. And, oh, wait. So sorry for the interruption. One moment as PowerPoint boots up. So a little bit about myself is I graduated from University of California, Santa Cruz in California, obviously, with a bachelor's in biology and psychology. My reason for going into psychology is I wanted to learn more about the struggles that I dealt with. And following graduating, I worked in several different direct service roles. I worked as a group home staff for foster youth. I worked as a direct service professional for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And I also worked as a peer supporter at a peer respite here in California. Unfortunately, what I learned is that I'm just not cut out for direct service. I love the work, but I just can't find a really healthy life balance and not reach burnout. So I still wanted to help individuals, and the way that I could do that was through research. So hopefully I can get my presentation here coming up. So I found a job at Live and Learn Inc. And I started as a research assistant, and then I moved into other roles, and I eventually came to be the research program manager for the company, which means I kind of oversee all of our projects. And all right, hold on, technical difficulties with my PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. So like I said, I work for Live and Learn, and we are a social enterprise based in California that provides public health research and consulting. We prioritize the experiences of people with lived experience, as we pride ourselves in being a survivor-run organization or research organization. I think we are the only one in the United States, but I could be wrong. Time has passed since we first came to be. All right, now I will present. One moment. All right, here we go. Thank you all for your patience. I really appreciate it. Technical difficulties are always so wonderful. Okay, now that I'm oriented, back to what I was going to say. So yeah, Live and Learn, we have multiple projects. A lot of our work is in peer support. We do a lot of work in peer respites, and we also have a new project or new-ish project on helping individuals who have disruptions in work because of mental health struggles become self-employed. So that's kind of what we do and who we are. I will move into like my business stuff, which is the acknowledgements. I'm happy to acknowledge our funders and partners, as we could not do that with any of our work without them. Also in my chaos, I didn't mention that what I'll be talking about today is, let's see, oh, okay, is the first year findings of the Certified Peer Specialist Study, Career Outcome Study, which is what I'll be talking about mostly today, but I'll also be talking about the Doors to Wellbeing Peer Specialist Database, which is a great resource. So if you haven't checked it out, I really encourage it. Okay. Okay. So again, our funders, so our study is funded by N.A.P.S. The study, or the Peer Specialist Database, was under a grant from SAMHSA. And so just a little bit of business, I have to read the fact that the contents of this presentation were developed with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, and Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. N.A.P.S is the center within the Administration for Community Living, ACL, and SAMHSA are both part of the Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily represent the policies of any of these programs, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Just my business that I have to do. But our partners in these projects, so Live and Learn received the grant to do the CPS Career Outcome Study, and our partners were Temple University, the Center on Community Inclusion of Individuals with Psychiatric Disabilities, and Chicago, or University of Illinois at Chicago Center on Mental Health Services Research and Policy. So those are our partners. And then Doors to Wellbeing, which is under the Copeland Center, they partnered with Live and Learn to help them update the database that I will be referring to today. So just a little bit of overview and disclaimers. This presentation summarizes information from the Peer Specialist Database, as I mentioned. I'll also be talking about research findings from our independent peer-led research study. These are first year results and preliminary findings. I just say that because as we do analysis and dig deeper into the data, some things do change. It's not to say that what I'm saying right now is not true. It's just to say that the way that we look at things might adapt over time. So just know that these are preliminary findings, as it is only the first year results versus our many years to come. The survey data are based on averages, which means that it might not be representative to every individual's experience. And then finally, just to reiterate what was said earlier, if you have any questions or technical concerns, please put them in the Q&A. I hope that my technical difficulties didn't disrupt and throw us off time, but I do hope to get to questions at the end of this. So the learning objectives for today, first and foremost, I'm sure I don't need to define what a certified peer specialist is to an organization of peer specialists or peer supporters, but I will talk a little bit about what they are, and I will summarize the certification process across the states as it does differ. My hope is that you will leave this presentation with an understanding of the working conditions and career opportunities that we know about through research. And then again, the grand scheme hope is that this information can be used to advocate for the needs of peer specialists, both in the certification process, because those things can be adapted to better suit the needs, and also in employment opportunities, because we want for both of those to be meeting the needs and wants of peer specialists. So peer specialist certification, where are we at currently? So there are 46 states and territories. I say territories because we include DC, which is not technically a territory, but it's also not a state. So 46 states and territories, and over 25,000 certified peer specialists. That number is a few years old, so I'm sure that it's more than that. It's just the last data point that is backed up that I could present today. SAMHSA did a workforce report where they talked about all of the behavioral health and substance use needs for support and services across the United States. And they looked at the existing workers in the field, you know, psychiatrists, therapists, psychologists, and peer specialists. And they've kind of made a prediction about where the field needs to go to be able to meet the needs. And their prediction included the fact that peer specialists will eventually make up 25% of the behavioral health workforce, which is really exciting. The peer specialist database, as I mentioned, and what I will be talking about next was created under the Doors to Wellbeing, which is a National Consumer Technical Assistance Center and a program under the Copeland Center. They created it several years ago, and then in 2020, they contracted with Live and Learn to update the information. Basically, what we do to update the information is we do a deep dive into every state's certification process. All of the information is available online. We did verify with the states if the information was correct, but we wanted everything to have a reference or a source. So it's not just some, you know, state policymaker saying that this is the future. You know, what is it currently? And that's what we are at now. So again, all 50 states and some of the territories, which include District of Columbia, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico. So out of all of those, 46 states, and out of 51, again, including District of Columbia, have peer specialist certification. So that means that the territories don't have certifications, and it means that 5 of our states don't have certification processes. Those states are California, Arizona, Alaska, South Dakota, and Vermont. I believe Vermont is working on one, and I'm based in California, so I know that California is working on one. I can't speak to the other 3, but I did want to say that despite them not having certification, they do have peer support roles. So they still have peer providers and programs that hire peers. But the one exception is South Dakota, which only has peer support for substance use disorders, not for mental health. I don't know why that is. It's just something that we found in our search. So I want to talk a little bit about the certification specializations, because some states, again, as I mentioned, mental health, substance use, which I'll talk about next, but some states offer either certifications that are specific to these specializations, or you get the general certification and then you can train in a few different areas to get a special specification on top of that. So, excuse me. So a majority of the states, so these numbers on the side are the number of states that offer each one. So a good portion of states offer different populations, so parents and family, youth, forensic peer support, which is criminal justice involved individuals, veterans, older adults, and TAY, which is transitional age youth. And then on the other side, in addition to mental health, some states have specific certifications for substance use. One state even has a gambling special specification. But then there's some other ones. Let me leave this up, maybe. I don't know, my computer is being slow again. But there's other ones like hospital bridgers, supportive housing, crisis services, supported employment skills, and rights protection and advocacy. Don't have the definitions for all of those off the top of my head, but they're just areas that they've noticed that they needed more peer involvement. Oh, there we go. All right. So as I mentioned, there's this differentiation between mental health and substance use. So the database wanted to know, do states differentiate? And as you can see, a majority of states actually don't differentiate. And so they define this as diagnosed with a mental health condition and or substance use disorder. That being said, a smaller number of individuals, I know you guys can't see this, but my computer is just wanting to go very slow. Imagine there's a circle around the mental health and substance use separation. So there are 12 states that do, who have certification that do differentiate. They have a certification for mental health peers and a certification for substance use disorder peers. And then there's a handful that are unknown. And so as I mentioned, in developing this database and updating the information, the biggest point was to make sure that there was a source behind it. And so some states are very clear and have all of the information lined out really well and beautifully for peers to, you know, learn how to get certified. And then some states you have to dig really deep. So I just want to point out that if researchers can't find the answer easily, then, you know, it's not going to be easy to the general public, which these programs are meant to be. You know, if you want to get certified, it should be easy to figure it out. So a couple of my things will say unknown, or not all the states say it. It's not that they don't have these things, it's just it's not known. Okay. Peer specialist supervisors. So another interesting topic that it's really important to discuss. At least 13 states define supervisors as qualified practitioners. So these are defined, it varies depending on state, but licensed psychologist, professional counselor, certified social worker, marriage and family therapist, registered nurse, psychiatrist, and physician. So as you can tell from this list, these are all professions that require usually require higher education of a master's, sometimes PhD or MD. And they also require a different license or certification process that is sometimes viewed as more strenuous than some of the CPS ones. Oh, come on. Okay, here we go. Fewer states define supervisors to include experienced CPS. So not to say that a licensed psychologist also can't be someone with lived experience, but some states specifically do say that if you are an experienced certified peer specialist, they even have another certification process you can go through to become a certified peer specialist supervisor, which is great. We believe that this is probably because of the fact that states who receive Medicaid funding for peer services, often that requires supervisors to be this, you know, higher level of practitioner. So this is a quote from our study, which I will get to describing a little bit later, but it's a quote from a participant, and she said, the boss, supervised people before, but I felt like she needed more training on how to supervise a peer, and we all kind of lacked the ability to communicate with each other. So just a really important point that supervisors who don't identify as having lived experience, they probably need additional support to be able to support peer specialists, not because peer specialists need it, but because I think there's definitely a stigma around people with lived experience. And so definitely more to come for this. There's a research study, I don't have it quoted here, but they looked at the perspectives of a supervisor who identifies as a peer and a supervisor who doesn't identify as a peer, and their perspectives on peer workers. And it's really interesting. So if you want that, feel free to email me. I can include that in the chat later, and I can send you that article. So now I want to break down some common requirements for certification. These are the most common across the states. Education level result, 41 states have very clear education level requirements to become certified. 29 states have a very clear-cut definition of an age requirement to become a certified peer specialist. 41 states have a very distinct definition of lived experience. 20 states require background checks of some sort, and 26 states require work experience. So I'm going to break these down a little bit further so we can kind of know the similarities and the differences. Starting with education and age. Really appreciated my computer would work. All right. So for education, most of the states that require certification, 33 of them require it to be a high school diploma or GED. There's other requirements, such as some states allow people who are 16 or 17 to work as a youth peer specialist, and those individuals obviously haven't finished high school, so they're not required to meet that requirement. And other situations are veterans can provide discharge paperwork instead of their GED. And I think those are the only unique cases that I can remember off the top of my head and not paying attention to my notes. Yes. Okay, Age is the other one. So again, the majority of states that have an age requirement require just straight out 18 years or older was the most common. Some states, 3 states have a 21 years or older requirement, and then there's one random state that says 19. Don't know the difference between 18 and 19. And then again, there are those states that I think 16, because that's the working age for most states, they can become a youth peer specialist. Okay, so now moving into, the other options for education were that they didn't require a certain level of education, but that you needed to be able to read at a certain reading level and be able to write at a certain level as well. Okay, so now to live experience component of it, which I mean is kind of the whole definition of being a peer. So lived experience is defined several ways across the states. Current or former consumer of mental health services is one definition. Primary diagnosis of a mental illness or co-occurring disorder. Experience of mental health challenges that has had a serious impact of life and relationships for an extended period of time. So as you can see, the states kind of differ and have different ways of defining it, and some of them are more clinical, where you have to have a specific diagnosis, and some are really valuing the fact that it's your lived experience and it doesn't have to be clinical, and really valuing that peer identity and role. Some states also require someone to be well-grounded in recovery. I don't mean to smirk, but it's an interesting topic, I'll say. So the states that do require this define recovery multiple ways. They require, some use the SAMHSA definition. Others say in recovery for a defined amount of time, it's usually about a year or two. Recovery may involve setbacks, meaning that some states understand that recovery is not a straight line. It's never a straight line. So they recognize that and they acknowledge it, and they allow peers and people that are certified peer specialists to have these setbacks. And then other states are very descriptive and describe it as no hospitalizations longer than 72 hours and no incarceration for a set amount of time, which again is about a year or two. Okay, background checks. So this chart here shows the states that have a requirement, not requirement, and unknown. And the background checks are required by 20 states, as I said earlier. Okay. This can be defined as the ability to pass a background check, or the other option is disclosing and providing documentation about any kind of issues that might come up on your background check. Sometimes states have this requirement because it's required to work with a certain group of people, specifically youth. And then it's also some states to states dependent on the conviction. So some of the ones that disqualify people in certain states are domestic violence, any kind of sexual offense or other serious crime against persons, or felonies that relate to, or felonies that may influence or negatively influence any duties that they have to perform as a peer specialist. So those without the requirement, they do specify to people being certified that it may still be required by an employer. So even though certified, like to get certified, you don't need to have background check, but the employer might request it. And then they also just strongly encourage people to still disclose their background as they kind of do the whole ask for permission, not forgiveness thing. So again, some more quotes from our study is, I still can't get a job after that training because of my background, and yet that's what got me here, or that's what got me a certification, is my background. And then certification hasn't helped me in a career, as I can't get anyone to hire me due to my charges and lengthy incarceration, as well as lack of work history in 11 years. So that leads me straight into the work experience and professional requirements that some states have. So work experience, some states say that you have to have experience prior to applying for the certification, while other states have provisional certification. So you get certified, you have a set number of hours you need to get within a set amount of time, and then you move up to full certification. So it differs from states. Some other professional requirements that aren't necessarily work ones. Quite a few states do require driver's licenses. Experience with leadership, advocacy, or governance is either required and or strongly encouraged. And then some states just simply say like you need to have strong reading comprehension and written communication skills. The communication skills thing, it could be because of documentation, which we've heard from a lot of our participants that they have a lot of documentation they have to do. So one of the major barriers has been entering into the field. One would assume that mental health, behavioral health professionals would not only understand, but expect a less than perfect work history from a newly certified peer support specialist. You know, it's both, as the previous quote had said, you know, I got this because of my experience, yet I'm expected to have a clean background and all this extensive work history and everything. So we have found that there are barriers to individuals getting work in this field after certification. Another person in reference to the fact that they had to drive a lot for their job, if they got hired as a peer specialist, they said, I would have been in the car like 5 to 6 hours a shift. So I was like, okay, they're hiring me to be a taxi driver instead of doing things that are actually beneficial to people. And then there was another quote that I didn't fit on here because it was really long, but basically they were saying that they were challenged with their job because they had so much documentation to do. And they received very little to no training on how to do the documentation. So they actually worked hours outside of their job just to meet the documentation requirements and didn't bill for it. Training, tests, and CEUs, which are all part of most states' requirements. So the process of getting certified usually looks like there's a training in most states. This can vary. Some states create their own course or trainings. Some states just approve training vendors, so they have different options for people across the state. And then some states leave it pretty open and they just require you to have a certain number of hours and to meet this criteria that they have, which is both great because then you can kind of like, you know, build your own training, but also I could see it being really difficult for people because it's so open-ended and, you know, the world is your oyster, but sometimes too many options can be overwhelming, at least for me. My computer. I do apologize. I continue to blame my computer, but it is its fault. So 37 states have a certification test, either a statewide or it's part of the training process. There are 6 states that don't require tests, but they kind of say that they leave it open to the training entity. Okay, there are some unique cases for certification tests. There is one state that has 2 different trainings. One of the trainings has a test and one of them doesn't. There's one state that requires a qualification exam before you attend training. So you have to take an exam, then you can get accepted into the training. And then there's another state that requires you to pass a peer specialist webinar. So you take the webinar and you have to pass that, which I believe is virtual. So maintaining certification among states. Continuing education units, so CEUs, 43 states have varying requirements. These requirements can be trainings, seminars, workshops, college courses. Most states are pretty flexible with this. This is a graph that shows the number of hours and the number of states that require each set of number of hours. As you can see, the majority of states fall in this 10-hour, 17 states. I will say though, that this kind of varies. So some states do CEUs every year and it's 10 hours, and some states do them every 2 years. So in that case, it would be 20 hours over 2 years, etc. So cost and funding sources. There are multiple fees associated with getting certified. Initial certification can include training registration, the application processing, the exam, the actual training. From the research in this database, we've seen trainings that range from free to costing as much as $1,400, but many are in the low hundreds. So recertification has its fees. I was going to say application fees also can be as low as $30 and they can be as high as $175 depending on the state. In this, there are only 10 states that, again, clearly claim to cover the certification cost. So if the state's not covering it, funding sources come from the person. If they have an employer that will pay for it, employment supportive services, available grants or scholarships. Some states have money set aside to help some people, but not everybody. And then State Department or local organizations. So another quote, just to add some context to all this information, is if you qualify for their, meaning the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, they pay for the 2-week training at the state level. I didn't qualify, so I paid $1,100 out of pocket to take a 2-week class so that I could take the certification test. So just to really take this home, you're paying $1,200 or $1,100, but you're also taking 2 weeks off of work. So it's a lot. Okay. Now to get to the research part, which is our study. So our study is called the Certified Peer Specialist Career Outcome Study. So CPS does not stand for Child Protective Services. It stands for Certified Peer Specialist. Our study is a 3-year national longitudinal study. And like I said, we're looking at career outcomes. Some of the questions that we had that kind of encouraged the study and what we're trying to answer in all of this is, what is work like after certification? Is it different than before they got certified? Do they have more job opportunities available to them? Is the employment related to the local job market or context? And how does certification change peer specialists' social, emotional, and financial situations? So not only is it opening more doors for employment, but has it helped them personally? So these are the states that we recruited from: Oregon, Texas, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. You can see the numbers of participants from each state. The reasons we chose these states is geographic diversity. We wanted to connect with as many many regions of the United States as possible. The other is willingness to share information. So some states have databases that include peer specialist names and contact information because they are considered, they're like the databases that you can find a therapist in or a physical therapist in. And other states, they were not willing to share participant information because they considered peer specialists to be a sensitive population and didn't feel comfortable sharing their information, which is fine. We obviously only want people who consent to being in the study, but that obviously impacted our ability to recruit from different states. And then the other thing is the number of people certified in 2019, as we were recruiting recently certified individuals. I will say that many of the states here, or the 4 states that are here, several of them had grandparenting processes for their previously certified individuals. And so we do have a subset of participants that have been certified for several years. At first, this was the end of the world in our study, but it actually ended up working out really well because we have comparative measures of people who've been certified longer versus newly certified. And then, as you know, we had COVID happen in 2019, and I know very few states were certifying. So it worked out that we ended up having a decent amount from 2019. So who are these participants? People who are recently certified as peer specialists, again, a little asterisk that says not all of them are recently certified, but we ended up with 681 individuals in our sample. 325 said they were working in peer support jobs. 123 were working in other jobs that were not peer support related. And then there were 143 individuals not working at all at the time of the study. So sample characteristics. The plurality of our group were identify as female, but we did have a handful of individuals that identify as non-binary, genderqueer, and transgender. For age, our range was between 21 and 83 years old. The average was 41 and a half years. Some more sample characteristics just to give you an idea of who these individuals are. Again, the plurality of our sample was white, it was 67%, but we did have 26% African American, 5% American Indian, and then a smaller representation of Asian, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Alaskan Native. An ethnicity, 10% of our sample identified as Latinx. For education, so again, and this makes sense with the certification requirements in states, no one in our sample was had less than a high school diploma or GED. We do see a good amount of people, 39%, that had some college, but a good handful of individuals had some kind of degree, whether it was an associate's, bachelor's, or higher level. Okay, so the negative experiences at work. We adapted the Kessler's Foundation scale, or item, I guess you could call it. And this was adapted, it's a 14-item scale that just asks about negative work experiences, and we adapted it to include peer support, non-peer support, and both peer support jobs, so you've experienced it in both settings. So our sample had an average of 4.4 lifetime negative work experiences, and that's out of the 14 possibilities. I might have said 12 earlier, but I meant 14. So these are the most common in our sample. We had 52% of individuals in our sample say that they've heard offensive comments about people with lived experience. 51% reported getting paid less than others in similar jobs as them. 45% said both negative attitudes from their coworkers and did not receive enough education or training to do their job. Excuse me. 44% said negative attitudes from their supervisor. 43 said they had lack of job counseling or mentoring, and then 37 were concerned about losing government benefits or assistance. So just quickly before I go into this, this is descriptive data. We didn't find, besides the 4.4, we didn't find anything, any kind of association, but I do think it's very descriptively interesting. That's why I wanted to show it today. So the good amount of people experienced them in both peer support and non-peer support jobs. Then we see non-peer support jobs in orange, and this purplish color is peer support jobs only. You're not seeing things that are meant to be happening. I was going to point out that hearing offensive comments about people with lived experience, there they are. Hearing offensive comments about people with lived experience and concerns about losing government benefits were most common for both kinds of jobs. Those were the highest numbers we saw in that category. And then for peer support jobs only, the highest one was the concern about not getting paid enough or the same amount as others in the same similar job. And then in non-peer support jobs, the most common negative experience at work was negative attitudes from the coworker and supervisor. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some bivariate analysis, which means we compared two variables to see if they had a relationship. And this is in peer support versus other jobs. So we did find that Black individuals, my box is not coming up, but Black individuals, we were less likely to be working in peer support jobs. At this time, we don't know if it's because our Black participants were from majorly one state, and if that state just has fewer peer support jobs, that would make sense as to why we see this, or if it has to do with hiring disparities, which we all know that people of color have experienced hiring disparities across time. So some more bivariate analysis of, who's working in peer support jobs or not are the people who were certified longer were more likely to be working in a peer support job. I believe the difference was 2.9 years and more, you were more likely to be in a peer support job. 2 years and less, you were less likely to be working in peer support. And then the other supporting factor to this was if people had worked because we had asked about their work history 5 years prior, if they'd worked all 60 months, meaning no disruptions of work or no pauses or anything, they were more likely to be working in peer support jobs. Again, this is kind of representative of what the state's requirements are, because the states require you to have work experience, and it's usually of so many hours in a year. So it makes sense that this is what we saw. So our next level of analysis after descriptive and bivariate is what kind of things are related to being a peer specialist. And so we do this through multivariate analysis, through building models. And so some of the things we looked at in the models were demographics, whether someone was on Social Security benefits or had veteran status, work history, obviously, data certification, behavioral health service use and self-reported diagnosis, and then disclosing to work colleagues or colleagues at work, and then rural versus urban, or is there a difference there? So our findings from that, participants were more likely to be working a peer support job versus a non-peer support job if they have a depression diagnosis, if they openly disclose their personal experience of mental health challenges to their colleagues, and if they are living in an area with lower unemployment rates. So the disclosure part is kind of obvious, right? If part of the peer role is to be out and proud about being a peer. And so this makes sense. And then in the living in areas with lower local unemployment rate, we don't know if this is just something to do with the area or the fact that the peer jobs are creating more employment opportunities and therefore lowering the unemployment rate. For depression diagnosis, other research has said that people in peer support roles identify as having a depressive diagnosis, but we don't really know much more than that. Okay, so now that we know like who's working in peer support based on our sample, we wanted to know what did we find out about the quality of peer support jobs, because obviously we're really interested about that and we need to know if they need to be better. So one of the findings is that CPS jobs were correlated with having higher job satisfaction compared to non-CPS jobs. So higher job satisfaction is a great thing. We use the, I don't have it here. Yes, I do. The Short, Brayfield, and Roth job satisfaction scale. If anybody's interested in research, that's where that came from. And then some context again, just to add in. Someone from our survey said, I consider myself very fortunate. This is a dream job, hands-on peer work with my clients, nothing beats it. I love my job, I love my people, I'm very busy all the time, but it's kind of like my getaway from life. This has always been my passion, to come in and stand alongside someone. And then finally, which is not showing up, we'll see. Okay, it allowed me, a person thriving in recovery but lacking in formal education, to have a job that wasn't in a restaurant but still being of service. Another finding about the quality of these jobs, we did find that peer support jobs were more likely to offer paid time off than other jobs, which is a great benefit. Wages, that is a hot topic, right? So we did not find any significant difference between hourly wage and the average hours worked by both, but both were slightly higher in peer support jobs than non-peer support jobs. So peer support jobs on average made $15.93 versus $15.60 in other jobs. 33 hours versus 31 hours. Again, this is not statistically different, but we can see it visually that it is. Peer support wages overall are well below the average of the national average, or the national average in job specific categories. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has job categories, and first and foremost, the average wage in 2020 for all occupations, if you take them all and you sum that or average them, was $27.07. So compared to the $15.93, well below. Community and social services, which peer support jobs can kind of be identified as that level, were $25.09. Community health workers, again, another area they can be considered, $22.12. Social and human services assistants made at $18.38. And this is someone who's an assistant and not actually necessarily working directly with people. They still made more money than peer support specialists on average. So another quote, the magic figure of $15 per hour being a living wage is only true if that's net income, but then it's a struggle. But there are rewards beyond income in this field. So again, we've talked about the job satisfaction and more likely to get PTO. Those are great things, but wages need to kind of catch up with that. Other wage findings, we did find that women had lower hourly pay rates than men. This is in peer support jobs. This is consistent with most jobs, so not super surprising, but still interesting. Residents who were in small towns or rural communities were associated with lower pay for all jobs, and that also included peer support jobs. But not everyone experienced these lower wages. Veterans had significantly higher pay rates than non-veterans in peer support. Full-time hours were significantly associated with higher pay as well. So if you're working full-time, you were more likely to be paid more in peer support jobs. So one last thing I think this is the last thing, financial well-being. So that's defined as a state where a person can fully meet current and ongoing financial obligations and can feel secure in their financial future and is able to make choices that will allow them to enjoy life. This is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But we wanted to look at financial well-being, and the characteristics that we found in our sample that related to having a higher financial well-being were veteran status again, compared to non-veterans, older age, higher education, better physical health, and full-time hours again, were all contributors to people having higher financial well-being. I think that's it for this. Okay, and then briefly, I just want to talk about qualitative data. So we did interviews with individuals as well, and it just adds context because some of this stuff is really positive, right? You know, these jobs are great, they're highly satisfying. So despite these findings, not everyone has had a positive experience of following certification. Some barriers that were shared with us were securing a position, as you heard in some of those quotes, feeling prepared for the type of work, lots of comments about not having enough training in the job specific. You know, you get trained and you get certified, but then it could vary job from job. And then being taken seriously or having their role respected was a huge barrier that we've heard from. So someone says, I can't afford to get a job in the field, pay is too low, organizations don't have enough funding to offer decent health insurance packages. I would inevitably relapse into crisis if I could not afford regular therapy. It's honestly very upsetting that a job specifically created for people in recovery from mental health conditions is unable to provide appropriate healthcare benefits. Someone else said, I got a piece of paper that was required of me by the agency and state. That's it. It has not gotten me a raise, bonus, stipend, respect, recognition, or a pat on the head. So some pretty strong words there, or powerful, I shouldn't say strong. So some conclusions to wrap this data, which is a lot to dump on you all, I know, but to wrap up with the conclusions, certain diagnosis, disclosure to colleagues, and local unemployment rates were related to holding a peer position job versus other jobs. This kind of makes sense because disclosure is part of the job description, as I mentioned earlier. Not all participants desire a peer support role. We found that as well. Some people said they learned they didn't want to work in the field. Some positive aspects of peer support include paid time off and higher job satisfaction. But a really serious issue is that peer support wages are well below the national average, but they're not necessarily lower than other jobs. Veterans and people with a positive outlook on their health and higher education had higher financial well-being, and that also increased with age. So some closing remarks. As you can probably all tell from this, there's many layers to this peer certification and it varies state by state. Peer jobs are finding are more satisfying than other jobs. Peer support positions obviously still have room for improvement. You know, we talked about the wages. There's also many other areas that I've heard from participants or just from people in my own life that there's definitely room for improvement. Another important point is that employers and companies, they need to be held responsible too. So they need to honor what the peer role is. We've heard from several participants that they're managing medication and that they are restraining people, which is not the peer role at all. So there's definitely a responsibility in the employers as well. And I think a really important take home from all of this is that these are not entry-level positions, or they should not be treated as such. If you are going and getting certified, they are not an entry-level position. but they also do not receive the same respect as other professional titles, which doesn't make sense. And that's, again, these positions have some room to improve, and it's not on the peers or the positions themselves, but the employers and the certification board. So then the next, maybe, we are almost to the end, I promise you, as closing remarks is kind of, okay. This is just a really brilliant quote from one of our participants, and I love to include it in all of our presentations. So these meals that are turning out peer support specialists, and then you have an industry that's not hiring. And now it's become one more mechanism for a third party to come in and start making a profit. I mean, it's really well summed up in there, but that's the goal, right? We don't want for this outer side party to be coming in and making money off of people when they can't get employed afterwards. It should just be certification, find a job that's meaningful and has all these positive perks. So I encourage you to connect with us. A lot of the information that I've shared today, well, not the findings, but a lot of the information about the study that I've talked about is on peerspecialist.net. We have 2 more years. We're just about to wrap up data collection for the 2nd year, and then next year we'll wrap up data collection completely and then kind of compare over the time. I also strongly encourage you to check out the peer specialist database. It has so much great information about certification between states. And I know California's been referencing it to kind of learn from other states to build their certification process. You can also compare states, which is a really cool feature. Please visit Live and Learn Inc., our website, because we have other very interesting projects besides this one. You can follow us on social media. And then one last quote is, I don't know how we can talk about community mental health in the United States without having a couple explicitives, which again is a brilliant quote from one of our participants. So I will go ahead, I'm going to leave this up in case you want to write anything down or check them out. But I'm going to open it up to questions. I know we only have like 8 minutes left, and I apologize. Technical issues would have left a little bit more time, but let me go ahead and open this Q&A. So what formal education did I embark on to, oh yeah, so if you have questions, please feel free to get them in. So what formal education did I embark on to become a researcher? I literally only have my bachelor's, but we do have people working for our company that are research assistants that only have their high school education, or sometimes didn't even finish high school. But I will say for the vast majority of research organizations, a lot of it's based in academia. And so I tried to volunteer as a research assistant at a lab at a university, and they refused to accept me because I didn't have experience, even though it would be volunteer work. So it just depends. My company has been very generous. I mean, we're lived experience researchers. My boss is a survivor of the mental health system. And so we definitely value lived experience over education. And I have to say that some of our employees that don't have any kind of formal education have been way better employees because they're just they work harder. Okay. What states have peer support specialists for older adults? I don't know off the top of my head, but this is a great reference to the database at the Copeland Center. If you go on there and you can, I believe you can select that question and see which states do. You can also search, like I said, state comparison. Oh, someone would love the article. I'll try to, if you could email me, I'll put my email in the chat right now. If you could email me, I will send you that article. Done. And then how has COVID affected the peer workforce? So that's a really interesting question. For our study, it really impacted our ability to recruit individuals because, again, most people weren't getting certified in 2020. From what I know, no analysis or anything, but what I know from what I've heard from our peer specialists, a lot of them continue to work. Some companies transitioned to telehealth only. Some companies still had peers come in and just work with masks and whatnot. And then what was I going to say? Some states, had to adapt their certification process. We were discussing before this got started that Pennsylvania didn't certify anybody in 2020. And I believe that's the case for quite a few states because they had to make that adaptation for online learning. And so that's definitely impacted the peer workforce. But yeah, I would just say that burnout is something else that we're studying in this research study, and we are really interested in knowing burnout. Ideally, we would assume that burnout would be lower before you start working, but I'm sure a lot of people experience burnout because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's kind of influenced our baseline data. Any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Feel free to pop them in the Q&A. I will add my. Oh, it looks like someone in the chat said that Oklahoma has a older adult peer certification. Ooh. Almost sent you all my personal one, which I would receive emails there too, but they will get lost. Okay, that is my email. Oh, just kidding. I did not send it to everyone. This technology, I tell you. I might be a researcher, but sometimes I struggle. Okay, it is just my name, Morgan, at livelearninc.net. If anybody has any questions, I see someone said, can I work with you? Please feel free to email us. We can definitely talk about our research. We love to share it. We can share where we have our references in here, all of that good information. And yeah. I think that's it.
Great, thank you so much for your presentation today and everyone for joining us. We'll be ending the session shortly and the recording will be available on the website. Thank you.
I also see a couple emails in the chat. I'm going to try to snag them before we end, but just in case, please just email me. It's easier than having to email a whole bunch of people, but I will try to snag them, like I said. Also, feel free to email me if you'd like these slides. I do believe there's going to be a recording, but
there will be a recording. They will need to contact you to get the slides.
yes.
Thanks, everybody. I will be ending the session. You have everything you need, Morgan?
I do.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone.